Coming up on this TED Talk, Marfan syndrome.
Marfan syndrome is a disorder that affects the connective tissue in many parts of the body. Connective tissue provides strength and flexibility to structures such as bones, ligaments, muscles, blood vessels, and heart valves. The signs and symptoms of Marfan syndrome vary widely in severity, timing of onset, and rate of progression. People with Marfan syndrome have a tall, slender build and other symptoms of elongation of the hands, legs, and arms. Marfan syndrome is caused by the defect or mutation in the gene that tells the body to make fibrillin 1. This mutation results in an increase in a protein called transforming growth factor beta. The increase of this growth factor causes these connective tissue issues, which leads to parts of the body to have complications. Marfan syndrome can be present when born, but some symptoms can develop later. Most people have symptoms when they are born or as young as a child, while others don't develop symptoms until they are adults. Some features of Marfan syndrome, like ones that affect the bones, joints, and blood vessels, can get worse over time. It is important that people with this syndrome get diagnosed accurately and early so treatment can be applied as soon as possible, and so the patient doesn't end up with life-threatening complications. People who have Marfan syndrome have an autosomal dominant inheritance. Autosomal is a term used in genetic genealogy to describe DNA, which is inherited from the autosomal chromosomes. An autosome is any of the number of chromosomes as opposed to the sex chromosomes. Humans had 22 pairs of autosomes and 1 pair of sex chromosomes. With an autosomal dominant inheritance, this means that this mutated gene is on one of the autosomes. The gene fibrillin 1 is specifically located on the number 15 chromosome. Since this gene is dominant, it means that only one gene from one parent is necessary to pass down a trait or disorder. If one parent has a dominant trait or disorder, their child is 50% likely to inherit the trait or disorder.
This disease falls under the nature debate. The nature side of the argument revolves around the idea that people are shaped based on their inherited genetics and biology passed through their genes. Marfan is a genetic mutation which has been passed through the parent's genes. According to the NEMFR's Children's Health System, about 75% of the time, the gene for Marfan syndrome runs in families, getting passed down to kids from parents who have the disease. The gene change is inherited as autosomal dominant, which means every child born to a parent who has Marfan syndrome has a 50% chance of having it too. In the remaining 25% of cases, though neither parents have the disease, the genetic mutation responsible for Marfan syndrome happens spontaneously in either the egg or the sperm cell at the time of conception. Due to the autosomal dominant trait of this disease, children have a 50-50 chance of inheriting this disease on only one chromosome. Marfan is passed through the gene of the parent because if neither parent were to have this disease, the child would have only a 25% chance of having the disease due to syndrome development in the egg and sperm. This shows that the disease 75% of the time is passed to the gene, or the other 25% being it develops during conception. The Akhenaten family, during the 18th dynasty, inherited the disease Marfan. Research shows that an indication that as a child, Akhenaten was a family outcast. Scientists are studying the fact that Akhenaten suffered from a disease called Marfan syndrome, a genetic deficit that changes the body's connective tissues. Syndromes include short torso, long head, neck, arms, hands, and feet, pronounced collarbone, pot-bellied, heavy thighs, and poor muscle tone. Those who inherit it are often usually tall and are likely to have weakened torsos that can rupture. They can die at early age. If Akaton had the disease, each of his daughters had a 50-50 chance of inheriting it. That is why his daughters are shown with similar symptoms. In the pictures shown of his daughters, the Marfan syndrome was passed down through the genes from the father to his daughter. Marfan disease not only is seen internally throughout the genes, but is also viewed externally throughout the physical appearance of a person. Studies show that the most common external signs associated with Marfan syndrome include excessively long legs and arms, with the child's arm span being greater than his or her height. The fingers and toes may be long and slender, with loose jolts that can be bent beyond their normal limits. This unusual flexibility is called hypermobility. The child's face may also be long and narrow, and he or she may have noticeable curvature of the spine. It is important to note, however, that children with Marfan vary widely in the external signs of their disorder and in their severity. Even two children from the same family may look quite different. Most of the external features of Marfan syndrome become more pronounced as the child gets older, so that the diagnosis of the disorder is often easier in adults than in children to find. In many cases, the child may have few or very minor outward signs of the disorder, and the diagnosis may be missed until the child develops vision problems or cardiac symptoms. In this case, children who are born with this disease experiment different physical qualities compared to another. Overall, Marfan syndrome is affected by the nature. That's all. Thank you for listening to our TED Talk.